Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a single piece of legislation so vast, it basically tries to redraw the economic map for, well, nearly every American. Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that. What Republicans are calling President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It just passed the Senate, actually. Tie-breaking vote from Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
So, our mission today, cut through all the noise, look at the sources you've shared, and really highlight the crucial details, what this mega bill might actually mean for you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just the sheer ambition here. What it's trying to do at its core is make those Trump-era tax cuts permanent and allocate pretty significant funds for President Trump's vision for, border security. But, and this is key, it aims to offset a lot of that spending and revenue loss through, well, some substantial cuts to social safety net programs, foundational ones. We're drawing from quite a few places here. CNN analysis, reports from the CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, also the Tax Policy Center, and statements from groups like the American Hospital Association. It's a lot to cover, definitely, but we'll focus on the so what, the impact on different groups across the country.
Okay, good. Let's start where I think a lot of the immediate impact will be felt, those changes to federal support for health and food. The bill has some pretty significant shifts for people on Medicaid, right?
Indeed,
Really?
that's a really big one. For many Medicaid enrollees, particularly able-bodied Americans aged 19 to 64, who are part of the Medicaid expansion, the part that broadened eligibility under the ACA, for them, there's a new work requirement, brand new.
A work requirement, what does that involve?
It means they'd need to work or volunteer or be in school or job training for at least 80 hours a month.
Mm,
And this mandate, it also extends to parents if their children are 14 or older.
14, okay.
Beyond that, eligibility would be reviewed much more often. And some enrollees might even face fees, up to maybe $35 for certain types of care.
Fees for Medicaid.
Yeah, potentially. And here's the other big piece. States would get less federal funding for Medicaid, which could, force their hand. They might have to eliminate certain benefits or tighten up who can enroll.
Right, make cuts somewhere.
Exactly. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they estimate nearly 12 million more people could end up uninsured by 2034, and a lot of that loss is tied directly to these Medicaid changes.
12 million. Wow. Is that a net figure, like after accounting for people maybe finding other insurance?
That CBO estimate, yes, it's presented as a net loss. It suggests a big chunk of those folks wouldn't just, shift over to something else easily.
Yeah.
It really reflects the direct hit from these eligibility changes and the funding cuts. And it's not just healthcare feeling the pinch.
Right.
Looks like people relying on SNAP, food stamps for help affording groceries. They're also facing big changes.
Okay, what are the specifics there? How does SNAP change?
Well, the bill broadens the existing work mandate quite a bit. It would now include enrollees age 55 to 64. Also, parents of kids 14 and older, like with Medicaid, and veterans, former foster youth, even people experiencing homelessness.
So a much wider group needs to meet work requirements for food stamps.
A much wider group, yes.
Yeah.
And here's another major shift. For the first time, states would have to cover part of the benefit and the administrative costs themselves.
Oh, that's new. States usually just administer, right?
Yeah.
Federal government pays the benefit.
Traditionally, yes. This shift could be huge. It might lead states to, again, tighten benefits, cut eligibility, or maybe even think about pulling out of the program altogether if their budgets can't handle it. Plus, the bill would limit how much food stamp benefits can grow in the future, caps the growth rate.
Okay, so if you're listening and you're not on Medicaid or SNAP directly, does this mean you're kind of off the hook? What about folks with ACA policies, Obamacare?
That's a really important question, because even if you're not directly in those programs, these changes can absolutely have ripple effects. Big ones. For people with ACA policies, the bill seems to make it harder to enroll and get those federal subsidies for premiums, more verification steps, and it looks like it effectively ends automatic re-enrollment.
Which could mean people just fall off coverage if they don't actively re-enroll with the new hurdle.
Potentially, yes. The CBO thinks millions could lose their Obamacare coverage because of that. But the ripples go further. Hospitals, particularly in rural areas, they're raising alarms.
What about the Medicaid cuts?
Exactly. They're warning that steep cuts to Medicaid could force closures, force them to limit services, reduce staff, and that impacts care for everyone, not just Medicaid patients.
Right, if the local hospital closes.
Precisely. Rick Pollack, he's the CEO of the American Hospital Association, he put it pretty bluntly, said it could cause irreparable harm to access to care for all Americans. It's kind of mean.
And it's not just hospitals. Independent grocers, they're worried too.
About the SNAP changes. Yeah. They warn that cutting federal support for food stamps could really hurt local retailers. It hits grocery access, local economies, especially in communities where lots of folks rely on SNAP.
This sounds like it puts state governments in a really, really tough position.
Absolutely, state lawmakers would be looking at massive drops in federal support for both Medicaid and food stamps. Like we said, it forces incredibly difficult choices. Cut program benefits, cut who's eligible, or divert money from other places, like education or roads, infrastructure.
Yeah, things voters definitely notice.
Right. And one more thing here. The bill also limits how much states and local governments can tax healthcare providers, which for many states is actually a key way they fund their share of Medicaid right now. So it hits their funding from another angle too.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Taxes. That affects almost everyone. The bill extends the 2017 Trump tax cuts. What does that mean for the, average taxpayer? And who really benefits most here?
Right, the tax piece. So many taxpayers would continue to benefit from those individual income tax cuts. Lower rates, the nearly doubled standard deduction, all that stuff. Those were actually set to expire at the end of this year. This bill makes them permanent.
Okay, permanent extension.
The Tax Policy Center, they ran the numbers on the tax revisions, found that on average, households would see taxes go down by about $2,900. But, and this is really important, that average hides a huge variation depending on income. It's not $2,900 for everyone.
Right, averages can be tricky. Who sees the biggest cuts?
We'll get to the distribution in a sec.
Yeah.
Some folks might also benefit from a slightly larger child tax credit, and there's a temporary increase in the cap on state and local tax deductions, the SOLTAC cap.
Okay, so drilling down a bit, what about seniors specifically, or parents? How do they fare with all these tax and benefit changes combined?
Good question. For seniors, there's a temporary boost to their standard deduction, an extra $6,000 from 2025 through 2028. Though it phases out for higher incomes, this seems to be instead of that earlier promise about making Social Security benefits tax-free.
Ah, okay, a different approach.
Right. But here's a crucial point often missed. Lower income seniors who are on both Medicare and Medicaid, they could lose that Medicaid coverage. And Medicaid is vital for them. It helps pay Medicare premiums, covers costs Medicare doesn't, like long-term care, dental.
So a tax break for some seniors, but potentially a huge loss of essential coverage for others.
Exactly. It's a real split impact depending on income and reliance on Medicaid. Now, for parents, the child tax credit gets a permanent boost, up to $2,200 per child from $2,000 now. That's for single parents earning up to $200K, married couples up to $400K. But remember what we said earlier.
The work requirements.
Yeah, some parents, those with kids 14 or older, could face those new work rules to get Medicaid and food stamps. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag, depends on their specific situation, income, age of kids.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting for a very specific group. Babies. What's this about Trump accounts?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the standout, maybe more unexpected parts. It's a 3-year pilot program, 2025 to 2028. The idea is every American baby born during that time gets a $1,000 nest egg from the government.
$1,000 for every baby.
The $1,000 invested in an index fund. Then parents could add more, up to $5,000 each year, into these accounts. Watch the interest grow. They were initially called baby bonus or mega account, apparently, but the name landed on Trump accounts.
Huh. It sounds a bit like haven't Democrats proposed something similar, like baby bonds?
Exactly. It bears a real resemblance to proposals like Senator Cory Booker's baby bonds idea, which is fascinating, right? Sort of a rare, maybe unexpected point of potential overlap on the idea of universal capital grants could signal, a different direction for future debates about wealth and opportunity.
Very interesting. Okay. Beyond these big categories, health, food, taxes, babies, the bill has some other, maybe more niche, but still significant impacts. Let's touch on those. What about student loans?
Right. For student loan borrowers, there are some pretty big changes. New caps on federal loans for grad school and also on parent PLUS loans. Those are the ones parents take out. Fewer chances for deferment or forbearance, too. Limits on lending for part-time students, and a much more limited set of repayment options. It's definitely a move away from the loan forgiveness programs we saw emphasized in the Biden era. A real tightening.
Okay, tighter rules for borrowers. What about the schools themselves, particularly those big private universities with huge endowments?
Yeah, they're targeted specifically. Private universities with really large endowments face a tax hike. Their tax on endowment income jumps from 1.4% up to potentially 8%. That top rate hits colleges where the endowment is over $2 million per student.
So we're talking Harvard, Yale, Stanford.
Exactly. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT, Princeton, those kinds of institutions. It could definitely shift how they manage and spend that endowment money.
So tighter lending for students, higher taxes for wealthy universities. What about something more everyday, like buying a car? Anything there?
Actually, yes. Some potentially good news if you're buying a new American-made car with a loan. You could deduct up to $10,000 in interest from your taxable income.
Okay, an incentive for American-made cars bought with loans.
Right. But on the flip side, if you're interested in electric vehicles, big change there. The Biden-era EV tax credits, those were up to $7,500. Supposed to run through 2032, they would end abruptly at the end of September this year.
Wow, that's a sharp cutoff for EVs.
Very sharp. It's quite a statement on prioritizing traditional auto manufacturing versus EVs.
It definitely seems like, especially on the tax side, wealthier Americans benefit quite a bit from this bill. But what does this all do to the bigger picture? The national debt, it's already around, what, $36 trillion?
Yeah, you're right to connect those. The Tax Policy Center analysis confirms that wealthy Americans benefit far more from the tax package. They estimate about 60% of the tax cut benefits go to the top 20% of earners. That's folks making $217,000 or more. Their average tax cut, around $12,500.
Okay, and the lowest income groups?
Much, much smaller. The lowest income households would see an average tax cut of only about $150. And, crucially, there's a report from the Budget Lab at Yale. It suggests that when you factor in those big cuts to the safety net programs we talked about, lower income Americans could actually see their overall income go down.
So the tax cut is more than wiped out by the benefit cuts for them.
That's what that analysis indicates, yes. Oh, and an interesting side note on who benefits. The bill also ends unemployment benefits for millionaires. Apparently, thousands had claimed them in 2021 and 2022.
Millionaires on unemployment. Huh.
Okay.
So back to the debt. With these tax cuts skewed towards the top and the spending cuts hitting the bottom, what's the net effect on the national debt? Does it go up and down?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? The CBO estimate is pretty stark. They project the bill would increase the deficit by $3.3 trillion over the next decade.
$8.3 trillion increase.
Increase, yes. Despite the safety net cuts. The tax cuts are just that large. And there's new spending, too, like the border wall funding. Now, Republicans have used a budget gimmick, some specific accounting rules, to argue the impact is smaller on paper. But the underlying reality, according to the CBO, is more debt, not less. The bill also raises the debt ceiling by $5 trillion to accommodate this.
And does more debt have other consequences? Like interest rates?
It could. A CBO analysis of an earlier version suggested it might push up interest rates, which means, mortgages, car loans, credit card payments could get more expensive for many Americans.
Right. Okay, before we wrap up, we have to touch on a couple of other really specific but very prominent items. There's significant money in here for something President Trump campaigned on hard, the border wall.
Yes, that's definitely in there. Big numbers. $36.5 billion allocated for border wall construction. That's funding he wasn't able to fully secure during his first term. There's also $45 billion for ICE, immigration and customs enforcement, specifically for detaining undocumented individuals.
$45 billion for detention.
Yeah. And related to this, the bill significantly restricts who among non-citizens can get federal benefits. We're talking food stamps, Medicaid, ACA subsidies, even Medicare. Eligibility gets narrowed. Refugees, asylees, victims of domestic violence or sex trafficking, they would no longer qualify for many of these benefits under this bill. And immigrants would face new or higher fees for things like asylum applications or work authorization. Creates more hurdles.
Okay. And talking about controversy, it sounds like this bill isn't universally popular, even drawing fire from some unexpected places, like Elon Musk.
That's right. It's an interesting reaction to track. Elon Musk has been quite vocal. The sources say howling about the bill on social media. His main issue seems to be the tax cuts adding so much to the deficit, he'd prefer more spending cuts instead. And he strongly opposes that abrupt end to the EV tax credits.
Wait, electric vehicle credit?
Yeah. He said it gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future. Pretty strong words. He even predicted it would be political suicide for Republicans if the bill becomes law. It just highlights how complex these massive bills are. They can draw criticism from all sorts of angles for different reasons.
Wow, okay. From Medicaid work requirements to baby nest eggs, huge tax shifts, border wall funding, EV credits ending. It's crystal clear this one big beautiful bill act really does touch almost every corner of American life. Some parts continue old policies, some reverse recent ones, and some things, like the baby accounts, are totally new. Our goal today was really just to give you a clear, concise rundown of what's in this massive package based on the sources.
Yeah, and if we connect all these pieces, you really see this intricate web, right? Policy, economics, individual impacts, all tangled together in these megabills.
Yeah.
Which leaves us, I think, with a really important question to think about moving forward. How will this specific mix, these permanent tax cuts, the significant safety net reductions, plus the big new spending on things like the border, how will all that actually shape the American economy and maybe more importantly, individual lives, your life, in the years ahead? Definitely something to mull over as you reflect on this deep dive into the bill.